Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening and welcome to the inaugural Evelyn Wrench Lecture. Our founder's aspiration in establishing the Overseas Club in 1910, which became the Royal Overseas League in 1960, was to foster a global network of friendship and understanding amongst like-minded people, regardless of race, colour or creed, a network that would inspire a genuine and lasting dialogue about what was important to us human beings. He envisaged a society of men and women pledged to fellowship and the service of others. And this worthy aspiration lies at the heart of what the Royal Overseas League is today, and finds expression, as it did in Evelyn Wrench's time, in the encouragement of the arts, particularly amongst young people, sponsoring of projects designed to assist those who are in need, the publishing of journals, and the presenting of social events and lectures to inform and inspire. Throughout our history, certainly since the 1940s, the Royal Overseas League has sought to showcase real artistic talent from around the Commonwealth and to provide a platform for eminent speakers across the spectrum of the arts, humanities and science to impart knowledge, generate debate and entertain. Latterly, this lecture platform has been based on the discussion group series of talks, which often convened fortnightly to hear from leaders in their respective fields. More recently, we have sought to recast our approach with a renewed intent to pursue excellence, to focus on significant issues of the day across the breadth of human endeavour, and to do so through the thoughts and experience of those most eminently qualified to speak to the subject. So it is with great pleasure that we embark on this new series tonight by addressing the important topic of the future of the arts in the United Kingdom. It is also a joy that we have, forming tonight's panel, three highly qualified and experienced leaders in the arts, each of whom would draw a large audience in their own right. And so to have all three of them together is simply not to be missed. Now, to introduce our panel and to guide us through this evening, I would like now to welcome and hand over to Professor Eve Mitleton Kelly, a Royal Overseas League Council member and an inspiration behind reviving areas of our art and literary programme for our members. You have her impressive biography in your programme, but Eve is most highly qualified to moderate tonight's discussions, not least because of her lifelong and boundless passion for the arts. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel and Eve Mitleton Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you, Roddy. My goodness. Well, welcome, everyone. I'm really very, very excited to be moderating this panel. As Roddy said, a very impressive list of speakers. What we will be discussing this evening is the arts in the UK vision for the future, and one thing we will explore both in the talks and afterwards in the questions is some of the challenges and some of the opportunities for the arts in the future. I will give you a short introduction to the three speakers in the order in which they will speak. But first of all, I would just like to mention that this session is being recorded. The main reason is there are only about 100 of you in this room. We have 16,000 members, and it would be so nice for the rest of them around the world to be able to hear this wonderful discussion this evening. Our first speaker will be Frances Morris. She is director of Tate Modern, and she was appointed as director in April 2016. She has overall responsibility for conceiving and executing the curatorial program of collection displays and exhibitions at Tate Modern, and Frances studied art history in Cambridge and the Courtauld. There are three concepts, I think, that capture her passion and vision. They are international, collaborative, and women artists. Frances has curated landmark exhibitions, many of which were large-scale international collaborations. She has curated some major retrospectives of women artists, including Louise Bourgeois, Agnes Martin, and has initiated the Karen Georgia O'Keeffe exhibition that has just opened at Tate Modern. And if you haven't been yet, I would encourage you to go. I asked our speakers to give me just a little snippet of something that is not normally published. And what came through is something that they have in common. Frances has been a sailor since she was 4 years old. And you will hear later when I talk about the other two that they also share that particular passion. So Frances will be our first speaker. Then it will be Alex Beard, who was appointed Chief Executive of the Royal Opera House in 2013 and was previously Deputy Director for Tate. During his time with Tate, Alex worked closely with Nicholas Sirota in the creation of Tate Modern. So you can see there are links already here. Alex Beard has a lifelong love of opera and a passionate enthusiasm for ballet. He was on the board of directors of Glyndebourne between 2008 and 2013 and is currently on the philanthropy board and the 1418 Now. That's a World War I commemorative association, among many others. He's a keen cyclist, cricketer, and cook. And in fact, when he first arrived and met Christopher, that's what they were talking about, cricket. Nothing to do with the arts, but cricket and what is happening. At the end of 2012, he was appointed CBE for his services to the arts. And he tells me that he's just acquired his day skipper certificate in sailing.
No, that was years ago.
Oh, that was years ago, right, okay.
No, that was when I was 22. But
Oh, my goodness, right, okay. And you can tell us everything else that has happened since, okay. Our third speaker will be Christopher Lebrun, who's president of the Royal Academy, but he's very much an artist in his own right. He's a painter, sculptor, and printmaker. He trained at the Slade and Chelsea Schools of Art. Since 1980, he appeared in many solo exhibitions in Britain, Europe, and America. Between 1990 and 2003, Christopher served as a trustee of the Tate. Again, it seems that the Tate is quite common between our three speakers, and subsequently of the National Gallery, and was involved in the developments of Tate at Bankside, Liverpool, and St. Ives, as well as the redevelopment of the East Wing of the National Gallery. He also helped to establish the Royal, which was before the Princess Drawing School in 2000. In the same year, he was elected Professor of Drawing at the Royal Academy, and in 2011, he was elected President of the Royal Academy. He is, in fact, the youngest to be elected since Lord Leighton in 1878. And his little anecdote is that his father was in the Royal Marines, and he was very keen on everything royal. These are our three speakers, ladies and gentlemen. And Frances, I would like to ask you to start, please.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it's lovely to share stage with two sort of former colleagues. But I was just, when you were making your opening remarks, just thought that I would have so much enjoyed meeting Evelyn Wrench, because I think we would have shared so much entrepreneur, forward thinker, and explorer. The ethos, the mission and ethos of this institution is, is so appropriate for the topics that I'm going to touch on this evening: the internationalism, the global, the ideas of collaboration, and the commitment to young people and developing audiences. One of the things I suppose I wanted to say at the start is that, we only opened Tate Modern, our new building, 4 weeks ago. And in a way, it comes at the end of a long period, not the end, because you're building a new building, but as part of a long period of museum and gallery building in this country. And it's been an extraordinary moment, massive development of the infrastructure of galleries and museums in the UK, which in itself says something about the importance of visual arts to our culture. But I think for Tate, there's been the story of two buildings. One is the building of our buildings, the new Switch House, but there's also behind that, and partly a motivation for it, was the building of the collection, which still goes on. And what I've been principally involved in over the last 10 years is building that collection and building a new collection on the back of a collection that was started. The foreign collection for Tate began in 1917. So just as the Russian revolutionaries stormed the barricades, in Millbank, a small group of fine art revolutionaries decided that the National Gallery of British Art should also buy foreign art. But so there's the building of the building of the collection, and of course now we move on to other buildings, and I think that's what it would be interesting to talk about tonight, is what we're really trying to build through culture. Audience building, we want to instill and encourage a passion for art. We're building in a new space. It's a digital cultural space. How we, as a nation, how as a culture, operate in that space is crucial. And of course, we're building opportunities for artists. We're building networks that will connect us across the world, and networks that activate conversations and creative encounters that cross international boundaries. And all those things are incredibly important for the cultural life and indeed the economy of the UK. Tate Modern, in particular, obviously is part of a much bigger cultural infrastructure, and particularly around the visual arts. But it within that has been, I think, to a degree, a mould breaker and an agenda setter. And it's interesting that a museum should have had that function, because we think and tend to think of museums as sort of dusty, old-fashioned, unchanging institutions that nurture and protect culture and heritage. And museums are indeed hardwired to look back. We have a historic collection, so history and heritage care is at the centre of what we do. But, we are also fortunate at the Tate of being a museum of modern and contemporary international art, as well as historic British art. So it's through the contemporary, through the now, that we interface with the contemporary world. So we're always looking back on the past through that contemporary lens. And when we opened Tate Modern in 2000, and Alex will know all about this, it really was an opportunity to reinvent the museum. And what we reinvented, or what we created, was a model of a museum that continuously reinvents itself. So a permanent collection in permanent evolution. And at that beginning of this new millennium, at the end of the 20th century, it just felt that the world had changed and art had changed, and it was no longer possible to tell the story of art as a story of Western European and North American achievements, and only as the achievements of white male painters and sculptors. And that realization in 2000 that we needed to address a bigger picture, we needed to look at art from across the world, and the dialogues that underpin art made in Britain, dialogues that do span the world, as well as the way painters think about photography and photographers think about sculpture and filmmakers think about all those medias and the way they interface, created a new kind of model of an institution that would have a much broader base. But within that, and I suppose of particular relevance to this institution, is the international aspect. And Tate Modern, I think above all, really is one of the very first museums across the world to take on the brief of an truly international agenda. So in place of the NATO alliance, which kind of governed our activities up to 1900, we now think about great art made everywhere, and that British art is absolutely embedded in an idea of fusion. And, you know, responding to the fact that we live in a great multicultural city, a world city, Tate Modern has now become a place where you can walk from Bankside to Beirut and to Beijing without a passport or a visa. There's nowhere else in the world you can do that. And it's also a place that you can time travel. So you can travel from Delhi in the 1990s to Sri Lanka in the 1930s. You can move quite quickly to look at Sudan in the 1960s and Tokyo in the 1970s. So diversity, the international diversity is the key. It's diversity in gender too. And one of the things that, as has been said already tonight, that I'm passionate about is restoring the presence of great women artists to the profile that they should have had and have had in many of their local communities and in their national histories, but to bring those great women artists to international recognition. So museums, of course, nurture heritage and they rediscover it for every generation. And what's, I suppose, really important about the Tate, which is maybe slightly different from the institutions that share the platform with me tonight, is that we hold a collection that belongs to you. It's a national collection which we nurture for future artists, but also for audiences. And one of the really stark things that we need to talk about tonight, and that obviously will govern much of what we do in the future, is that we nurture that collection, safeguard it, build it for you, but against a background of diminishing public funding. And I believe really passionately that our future at Tate, what we do, the programmes, the artists, should not be defined by austerity. But equally the future, when we're thinking about the moving from a basis of secure public funding to a more entrepreneurial model, is that we equally the future must not be defined purely in commercial terms. So the not-for-profit, however we want to describe that, is really fundamental to what we do, because it underpins a kind of, I suppose, a kind of pure creativity, a creativity that isn't defined by having to make a living or having to be sold. And it's about creating aesthetic experiences for people, audiences in galleries that create both joy, you know, inspirational experience, but also create places for thinking and thought. So rooms for thinking, objects for thinking. There's a famous British sculptor, Tony Cragg, who defines sculpture as thinking objects. And I love that term because, of course, art brings great joy into our lives, but it also helps us think through the many of the issues that we confront every day. So we're really talking about a model that's not just about money and transaction, but it's about value of a different kind. So artists, of course, works of art, the collection, artists are at the heart of the museum, and the future for the visual arts is that institutions like Tate, because of the commercial sector and the pressure on artists, you just think of the studio costs of living in London today, it must be a place where artists and creativity are nurtured, respected, interpreted, protected and presented, but not in a bubble. So the future is, of course, one where artists meet audiences, and that has to be increasingly a place of collaboration. And I don't even mean that in a way making together, but a place where there's a relationship, a conversation between the artist and the audience. Of course, one of the great narratives in 20th century art history is the move from a place where artists worked in their studio to create works of art that were consumed in a very passive way. And that's still a wonderful and a really important part of the work of artists. But of course, from the 1960s, there were other artists working in new media that were increasingly asking more of their audiences. They were asking audiences to comment, to participate, debate, to walk around the work of art, to complete the work of art, when art became active. And that narrative, trying to unpick why that happened, how it happened, and what it means for artists and audiences today, is of course a really key part of the way contemporary art museums in general, and Tate in particular, are interfacing and working with their publics to explain that and create within the space of a museum a place of public access. And of course that brings me to a really important point about the public museum, that we do live in an increasingly privatized world. And so the public space of the museum, and Tate is free entry, nobody pays anything to walk into our spaces, is incredibly important. And that non-commercial aspect of commissioning for the public in the public space is something that we have to hold very close to ourselves. It's a safe place for artists to meet the public, aspects of interaction that have no monetary value. Public space is increasingly scarce. I'm just thinking of my local borough, Lambeth. My library, the Tate Library, is under threat. My nearest urban open space, the garden square at the end of my road, has now been co-opted by its residents as a residents-only garden. And the two new pieces of cultural development in my neighbourhood, one is a commercial gallery in Vauxhall, and the other is a showcase gallery for a celebrity artist private collection. So in Lambeth at least, public space is shrinking, and you can see that pattern replicated across London. So a place like the Tate, which is a public space, needs to absorb and take on and respond to some of those responsibilities and roles that shrinking public space has housed. So how do we do this? We need to nurture risk-taking. We need to nurture a place of debate and collaboration. And the way we do that is, I suppose, very simply twofold. Philanthropy and sponsorship are absolutely crucial to creating opportunities for artists to make new work outside of a commercial context. And the biggest way we do that at the Tate is within our Turbine Hall commissions, the moment in the year where one artist takes on the challenge of our big public space. It's a really make or break moment for an artist's career. I hope we haven't broken any artist's career, but certainly amazing projects by people like Alassane have brought those artists to international acclaim. But beyond that very public space, there are also more private spaces, and I'm thinking about the new Tate Exchange space that we're developing that will open in the autumn, where we're going to be working with associate organisations who are going to support the Tate financially to work in collaboration, so that institutions working together around a common purpose, and that purpose will be thinking about the role and function and use value of art, and really thinking about what is the beyond the aesthetic pleasure, what is the role of the visual arts and the cultural sector as a whole in enhancing people's lives? What is the role of creativity? It's a really important question. More and more, we have to justify the importance and centrality of culture to our communities. And this is a way that we're going to be trying to do that, working in collaboration with artists and organisations. So, one of the big questions is about that public space. Who controls it? Who programs it? And our future, of course, will depend on developing and maintaining trust of artists and audiences in order to do that. But very briefly, I want to talk about, I suppose, that aspect of trust. That most museums, most cultural institutions are top-down models. We make the program with authority and knowledge and expertise, and we put it out there. And we live in a society where that authority is continuously now under question, and arguably that's a good thing. But we need to continue to speak with authority, but we need to do that in a way that reveals where the authority lies, and it's not a given. So research and kind of scholarly integrity, connections with universities, publications, are all incredibly important to the mission to speak with simplicity and a light touch to very broad audiences. And I think one of the things that I really want to emphasize is that as an organisation like Tate Modern, our audiences get bigger and bigger, it's not about creating a diluting a programme or lowering the tone or making it more accessible. It's about creating really sophisticated ways of communicating difficult, complex ideas, but with beautiful language and simplicity. We've got to be really, really good communicators, and part of that is about having a conversation. And the greatest opportunity there, of course, is the greatest concern, because we want to have that conversation with our public. And there is, in this public space, the real challenge now is that we are in danger of increasingly super-serving a very, very small and privileged portion of our community. So evidence of irrefutably proves that institutions like Tate are increasingly addressing a small audience. There are a disproportionate number of white, middle-class, highly educated, affluent visitors. All of them deserve culture. But of course, as a public institution with a public collection, we do need to reach out to engage with and welcome and give back to the bigger community in London and across the UK. The Warwick report last year drew attention to the fact that the poorest and most deprived communities in the UK have least access to culture. And I think one of the key ambitions for the future of arts organisations in the UK must be to find a way of sharing those cultural experiences across a greater proportion of the population. Diversity, we know, is absolutely the bedrock of creativity. Without diversity and diversity and equality of opportunity, we will not diversify our cohort of artists. We will not diversify our teams of curators and cultural practitioners. And in very simple terms, if we don't do that, we are diminishing and we're thinning the pool of talent from which art is made. I had the opportunity when I went to a state school to study art history. My state school, still a great school, that's no longer an option. Doors are closing to generations of young people who need access to the arts. The art subjects are disappearing from the EBAC. So the GCSE art is no longer an urgency. And when you look, those of you who have children who are doing UCAS and applying for universities, you will see that the opportunity that I had to go to Cambridge with 3 A-levels, one of which was art, is simply not possible now. So art is disappearing. So the enrichment of all our subjects through art is increasingly at peril. So I'm running out of time. I'd love to go on, but I will perhaps just touch on one other really important aspect of the future, because we're talking about the vision for the cultural sector over the next few years. The allure and authority of artists and cultural organisations now is inconceivable without a strong digital presence. And I'm pretty sure that the next great revolution in making of all kinds will be in that field. Really, there's no question. We are spending ourselves and our children increasing amounts of time on handsets and in front of screens. So finding a really good fit between the virtual and the real space of the museum or the opera house or the art gallery is incredibly important. The great opportunity is that it's at a fantastic global space. 42% of Tate's visitors to our website are international. When I gave a small talk during the opening weekend at Tate Modern about Louise Bourgeois, I was speaking to about 35 people in a gallery. My talk was live streamed on Facebook. 67,000 people across the world listened in, and 1,200 of them commented online to each other. And they were in Beirut and Buenos Aires and Belfast, to literally a conversation without barriers. So connectivity globally through the virtual space, interactivity in the galleries, participation, debate, they are really high on the agenda and they're embedded in our rhetoric. So public space, it's virtual and real. Tate Modern provides a gateway to that world culture. And as I said, in the most multicultural city in the world, without Europe, it's a place where you can access the world without that passport. So the journeys are free, and they will remain so. But it doesn't mean, this is really important, it's my last point, it doesn't mean that travel should be economy. So we should make those journeys really excellent. So absolutely excellent culture, accessible, enjoyable, and thought-provoking, like the best art. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Francis. Alex.
So I just come back from Japan a couple of weeks ago, where I was on tour with the Royal Ballet. A wonderful, wonderful, wonderful time. And I thought that I would use the advantage of a 14-hour flight to write my tightly argued script for this evening. And that I would use the way into that, an exhibition that we're presenting in partnership with the V&A next September around the history of Europe seen through the lens of cities and moments in the development of opera as an art form. And I thought I would take the results of the more or less inevitable Remain vote as to how we would... So anyway, this is version 2. I suppose this... so I'm not going to offer that many pointers to the features of arts institutions because, of course, events and artists and circumstance change that. But actually the subject did make me think a little bit about, what actually do we mean by an arts institution as such? And I suppose beyond the obvious, which is that they're places or stages or whatever, on which artists are either invited or presented to create life-changing experiences without quite enough money. They are, I think they have a number of characteristics in common. One is that they're the repositories of our cultural inheritance, our shared cultural memory, and that can either be in the form of objects that are owned and held on trust for the nation, or a repertoire which is a sort of shared cultural inheritance in the context of an opera house, and through which we can understand our collective stories and how we came to where we are. They're also, I think, places in which, through the interpretation of that inheritance, and maybe its augmentation through new commissions, that ideas can be presented and explored about our current place in the world, that each time a work is hung or reinterpreted by a creative team, that it invites us to reconsider where we are and how we are. And then, much, much more personally, they're places where we can explore and hopefully understand and connect with the big, big, big questions in life. Whether that is a sort of synthesis of very complicated structures and ideas in a really elegant infinity net painting, or an Agnes Martin grid, or in the case of opera and ballet, the moments where the really big things in life, the ineffable, the incomprehensible of death, real love, despair, betrayal, that they can be brought to life with extraordinary, remarkable forces. In Lyric Theatre's terms, crazy forces. 300 people coming together in the moment to do the downright impossible. And as a colleague of mine, Caspar Holton, describes arts institutions sort of at root, and Lyric Theatre's at root as emotional fitness centres, places where we can exercise our love muscle, our hate muscle, in safety before going out in the world. So that's my interpretation of an arts institution. The Royal Opera House is one. I think we tick those boxes. We are sort of inherently an international organisation. We're one of 5 major lyric theatres worldwide: the Met, the Paris Theatres, Bastille Theatre, Palais Garnier, La Scala in Milan, Vienna Staatsoper, and us. These are probably the top 5, where we aim to present the world's best artists, whatever that means, in what we hope to be considered one of the world's best stages, theatres. And there are 2 of them. So we have the Royal Opera House itself, wonderful, wonderful place, 1856, opened after in its 3rd incarnation, come back to that a bit. But we also have the Linbury Studio Theatre, which is currently a complete wreck. It's been totally demolished and is in the process of being rebuilt and will open in 2 years' time as a world-class, no longer studio theatre, but chamber theatre for the presentation of opera and ballet on a small, more intimate scale with a particularly experimental bent. We have 2 homes for our 2 companies, opera and ballet. The Royal Opera and the Royal Ballet are equal partners in our endeavour. I think that's a bit different compared to the other houses where opera is top dog and the ballet tends to be admitted. Not the case in Paris, but is emphatically the case in the Met, La Scala and Vienna. With 2 homes, one slap bang in the middle of Covent Garden, an international stage, rather imposing building, but also our Ideas Factory downriver in Thurrock at the Thames Gateway, where the sets are made, the costumes are held. We deliver a very significant education programme to 27 out of the 50 schools in the borough, delivering a programme of cultural entitlement. And I think that, on the one hand, metropolitan and international presence in Covent Garden, but on the other, locally rooted as a production base in Thurrock gives us an interesting perspective on the world. And one where we have an increasingly wide reach. I mean, Francis talked about the digital. We now present 12 times a year an opera and a ballet, 6 operas, 6 ballets, not just in Covent Garden, but to around about 476 cinemas around the UK, a further 1,000 around the world. So that, I'll give you an example, just before Christmas there were 85,000 people in the UK on one particular night, all enjoying the Nutcracker. But also thinking about ways of how we can bring the process of bringing work to the stage alive. I mean, process is, the digital exposes process, and World Ballet Live Day, which is now the 4th of October every year, is our fixture in the calendar, where we start off in Australia at midnight and go via looking at work in the studios, and then the baton is passed to Moscow, then to London, then to Toronto, and finally in San Francisco at 11:59 p.m. And 3 million people last year logged into that for an average of 28 minutes to explore what a ballet company is about. And we, I suppose, are a pretty remarkable people business. And that process of 300 people coming together in the moment to do things which are at the boundaries of human potential and possibility, night after night after night, 7:15 sharp. I very occasionally think wistfully back to days at the Tate when the 300 artists were on the walls rather than the payroll. But it gives it an absolutely remarkable frisson. Now, the art forms that we're the stewards of, custodians of, opera and ballet, have deep roots. Opera goes back to 1600 roughly, ballet 1650, and both forms started in the closed world of the European court for an invited few. And over the centuries have opened themselves up through into the life of the city, with opera houses popping up in pretty much every metropolitan centre in Europe, then the States, and more recently the Far East, 34 lyric theatres in construction at the moment in China, and just came back from a opening symposium of a skills exchange programme between a group of UK theatres and Chinese theatres. And that, I suppose that theme of opening up what were closed entertainments to a much wider world of audiences, and now through digital, digitally in the ether, is, I think, sort of central to our journey. I'll come on to that in a tick. And the Opera House itself has pretty deep roots. The first theatre in Covent Garden was built in 1732. We had 2 fires, hopefully no third. Since then, so the third theatre opened in 1846, and the Royal Opera House, as it currently exists as an institution, was founded in 1946, after the Second World War, when the Royal Opera House was reclaimed from a Mecca dance hall as a place of real cultural exchange and development. And the Royal Ballet is the senior partner, dates back to 1931, got its Royal Charter on its 25th birthday in 1956. The Royal Opera, or it was the Covent Garden Opera Company, is the Johnny Come Lately first show presented in 1946 with its Royal Charter not arriving until 1968. As Francis suggested, we face, I think, some pretty significant challenges at present. Obvious economic challenges. Whatever the end game is following Brexit, and I'm pretty optimistic actually, about the resilience of London and the UK's place in the world as a place where time zones are straddled, lingua franca is spoken, and there's a decent rule of law, and fundamental values of openness, inclusion and tolerance that will persist and hopefully strengthen through the no doubt challenges ahead. However, the next 2 years are going to be really difficult as our trading relationship with Europe is readjusted, and there will be uncertainty. There is bound to be, at least momentarily, postponement of investment, possibly recession, and no doubt economic challenges that we have to address. And actually, I don't think that's the big issue, because if there is ever a time when one of our institutions where there is sufficient finance to give vent to all the ideas that we have in our heads, then frankly it's time to give the keys to someone else. And that bridging of ambition and resource is sort of hardwired into who we are. But I think more profoundly there are really significant technological changes that have a big impact on our institutions. The fact that there are 62 accounts of Traviata available on Spotify that I can listen to at any moment for free means that just access to the content, just access to the chance of listening to Traviata is nowhere near enough. It needs to be a wonderful all-round experience, and the demands of the audience, driven I think largely by the digital, is that the experience of coming to a cultural institution should in all respects be utterly wonderful. And I think the institutions that are struggling a bit are those where, for various reasons, some within and some without their control, actually it's more difficult to deliver a really remarkable experience. There's a huge shift, I think, in competition worldwide for talent. I undertook a commission of inquiry into the Royal Opera House in 1991. And there it was firmly a NATO enterprise. But now we have to compete with Beijing, with Seoul, with the Middle East for top talent. And but at the same time, there's a much, much wider world of talent out there which we have to inspire to connect with us. So in part, presenting the cinema worldwide is to encourage emerging ballet dancers in Japan, the third most ballet-mad society on planet Earth, to think that Covent Garden is the stage on which they want to perform. And then, I think most profoundly of all, the impact of changes to the education system, largely unintended, that are narrowing the opportunities for people to understand these great art forms and to develop their own creative potential and so on. But that said, there are some remarkable opportunities. I think more people are enjoying lyric theatre today than at any time in the 400 years history of the forms. The Royal Opera House performs live each year to a paying audience of 1.6 million, to 1.6 to 1.8 million. Now, roughly half of those see us live in cinemas. But it is an experience that is shared in the moment, that we've done a great deal of research on, that people value, and that it's not the same, but it is breaking down all notions of geographic barriers, so that we can actually have a strap line today that says wherever you live in the UK, you're never further than 45 miles away from the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. We can say that with it's the truth. Other opportunities are and that audience wants to get more connected. Once you've got the bug, you want to get more involved. And the sense of commitment and passion that there is amongst our audience is just absolutely remarkable. And so developing, I think, an expanded sense of the institution. So it's not the 300 artists, the 1,200 employees, the 2,000 people in the supply chain, or even the 24,000 members, but it's the 150,000 people who make a significant part of their life and the experience of lyric theatre, and giving them the sense of being the institution itself and inviting them to contribute to its future and the expansion of opportunities for others to engage with those art forms, I think is a really interesting opportunity. As indeed is whatever the problems in northwestern Europe, whatever the problems in our relationship with the EU, this expanded world in which we operate, and how we develop co-productions and relationships with the Far East. For example, a Manon Lescaut that is developed between us and Shanghai. So, what are our pointers for the future to meeting those opportunities and challenges? I guess number one is that we're going to try, as far as humanly possible, not to lose the plot. Creating an environment where 300 people want to come together in the moment to do something phenomenally difficult for fees that are less than our competition are paying is really difficult. As soon as we think, at any time we think that is just happening, that happens by right, then we are absolutely lost. So that's a good 80% of what our future focus will be. But there's a 20%, I think, which is continuing that theme of opening up, that theme of opening up an art forms that started off in closed worlds of the European court. And doing so in three ways. One is to open up the artistic and cultural horizons of the form by ensuring that the very, very best artists of today can have their go at interpreting the repertoire, whether as performers or directors, but also to do our bit in terms of adding to that repertoire. We're the beneficiaries of hundreds of years of experiment and investment, and we need to do our bit for the next 300 to 400 years of the art. So ensuring that really ambitious missions are part of our programme is essential. Second is that we use our scale, reach, convening power to connect to their audiences more widely across the country, but also the audiences of the future. So last year we trialled a programme called the National Nutcracker, which invites 8 to 11-year-olds across the country to develop their own creative response to that iconic work over a term that we support and train the teachers, and at the end of that process the best work is filmed, shared, and the most interesting of those projects, the school is invited as guest of honour to the Opera House at the Royal Box with a whopping great big fanfare. And what we're trying to do there is to encourage teachers to have more confidence with art forms that they themselves may be more remote from, that they have less commitment to, but to also to try and do it in a way that has not sufficient pixie dust, kids and doves, how you want to describe it, that will inspire others to connect. So that's built into the programme. Many other ideas as well. And then finally, if we're trying to open up the artistic horizons of the form, do our bit to invest in the future, to open up opportunities for wider audiences and audiences of the future to engage with us, and then we have to be open at base. We have to demonstrably be part of the cultural fabric of the country, the city, and just having a mantra saying that 40% of our tickets are 40 quid or less and that you can always get to an opera house show for a tenner isn't enough. You have to be able to feel as you walk along Bow Street, as you are in Covent Garden Piazza, that there is an invitation to come into the building, that there's a way of seeing in, and that when you cross the threshold into the building, whether it's en route to a performance or not, that you get a sense of the creativity at play, you get a sense of the art forms that are being explored, and that you are enticed to make your own first step. So that's why we've got the builders in. And watch this space in spring, summer 2018 when that ribbon is snipped. But I do think that the constants of being an emotional fitness centre, a platform in which artists' work is presented to create life-changing experiences, no doubt without quite enough money, that will continue.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alex.
It's extremely impressive to sit with Francis and Alex, because I remember the first time I met them. You weren't actually serving the coffee, Alex, but he was sort of almost. I mean, he was very important to the Tate, actually. But to my enormous surprise, in 1990, I got a telephone call from Nick Sirota, and he said, "Christopher, would you consider being a trustee of the Tate Gallery?" And I had to sort of look at the telephone in disbelief. And I said, surely all trustees are like the fat controller in Thomas the Tank Engine. They wear silk top hats, always in tails. That's my idea of a trustee. He said, no. It's always been a tradition of artist trustees at the Tate, and often quite young, and do come in. And in those days, you didn't have to be interviewed. These days, there's a government inspector watching you from the corner of the room. You have to apply. It's completely ghastly. Anyway, all that needed to happen was for Mrs. Thatcher to say yes. Now, I think Mrs. Thatcher hardly knew where the Tate was. So she said, "Oh, yes, of course, of course." So I was in. So I sat there, and I think I was absolutely terrified. There were two other artist trustees. I think it might have been John Golding. I think I replaced Tony Caro. Anyway, incredibly distinguished. All these financiers, bankers, lawyers, donors, all the great and the good, a full panoply. Me, silent. And the chairman was a rather wonderful person, Dennis Stevenson. And Dennis used to watch me. And I remember one day he said, "Now, Christopher," he said, because I'd been silent for about an hour. He said, "Your ears are very red. I know you want to say something." So I did, and I used to blurt it out, you see. But quite often, because I had it all cooped up, I've been in my studio on my own all week, I'd often get to the point quite quickly. And it didn't matter whether I was right or wrong, you see. I'd get it out, there was a conversation, and things would move on. Anyway, I did this remarkably for about 5 years. It was a tremendous privilege. But the reason the artist is sitting in that room with two other artists is to contribute and to balance the room with the thoughts of the artist. Because frankly, the thoughts of the artist today aren't enormously different to what they were 250 years ago. And when they talk about how you're going to show a Turner, I sort of got a feeling for it. I sort of got a feeling. It's a terrible assumption, isn't it? Sort of got a feeling you might have thought. That's the value of the artist trustees. So, having done that apprenticeship there, and sort of enjoyed it, actually, despite my terror, I was then asked to go to the National Gallery. Anyway, the end of the story is, and all the time my wife is saying, "What are you doing? You should be in the studio." The end of the story is, I was elected to the Royal Academy in 1996. Now, the Royal Academy, to be fair, has a very checkered history. Started off out of the blocks fantastically. Reynolds, Chambers, Zoffany, a whole panoply of the great of the 18th century. And then, still good, still good, still good. But we hit a really bad patch. And there's a famous speech you all know about, and you know what I'm going to say now, don't you? Which was Munnings. Munnings stood up, I think it was something like 1947, and he said in front of the entire nation, broadcast to the nation, broadcast. Winston Churchill sat there, the brandies, no women, the brandies, the cigars. Munnings had had a few too many. And he stood up and he said, "If I saw Picasso walking down the street, I'd kick his arse." There's a tremendous intake of breath, but a lot of laughter. Now, listening to the broadcast were people like all the great British artists. It killed the Academy for 30 years. But here's the conflict. I will get round to the future at some point. Here's the conflict. Something interesting was going on. He was drunk, he was rude. But you know what? He wasn't wrong. I'll tell you why. Because he was an Edwardian artist saying what he thought. All right? I think he was wrong, because he's a great, great artist, one of the world masters forever. But Munnings was saying what he thought. Now I get to my point. Having watched the Tate and the National Gallery and seen the enormous responsibility of those two institutions, I felt there was something missing. And you will guess what I'm going to say now. What was missing, in effect, was the Royal Academy. Because the Royal Academy was set up, independent of government, to be the voice of the artist. And I think that was what was missing. Because the heavy responsibility that we place on these great institutions, particularly the Tate, the British Museum, the National Gallery, sort of way the Royal Opera House, to carry culture and to look after things for us, is a serious burden. But somehow something else is missing, and that's how does the voice of the artist come in? Now, from 1768, with the King's support, it was a professional body designed to get we artists off the treadmill of portraiture. Artists always think bigger all the time. We're people of ideas. We're not tradesmen. We've got ideas. We want to paint about history, philosophy. And that enabled artists to speak directly to the public and to sell their work through the summer exhibition and give the money that they earned, most of it into their own pockets, frankly, but a whole bit of it to the school. It's the oldest art school in Britain. It's almost 250 years old, and all the money from the summer exhibition, a lot of the money that's there, goes to the school. It's free. So, there was the Royal Academy sitting at the heart of things with the King, the government. This went on till about 1830, maybe almost up to 1840. There was a government inquiry. Some of you will have seen the film, the Mike Leigh film, of Turner. It's desperately overacted, you know. He wasn't a shuffling, mumbling, sex-crazed twit, you know. So it wasn't, you know, Timothy Spall filled his boots with that part. He wasn't like that. The key moment is when you see Martin Archer-Shea and Turner standing around in the room talking. Now, Martin Archer-Shea went into bat for the Academy. The government had designs on the Royal Academy. They wanted it to have a duty, a responsibility, like you have, Francis. Let's do something for the nation. Martin Archer-Shea was very fierce. When the government report came out, he said, "This is repugnant. Who are these vainglorious people?" He was tough. Amazingly, he fought the government off. The Academy kept its independence. But you know what the deal was? Okay, if that's the way you want it, that's the way you've got it. Off you go. So the Royal Academy slipped away into less importance as a private institution, raising its own money, and that's what we do today. Now, here comes the future. So I could see there was something missing. Selfishly, I thought, is this a good career move? Talked about it with my wife. What do you think? What do you think? Oh. But by inclination, I'm a rather probably foolishly romantic about a lot of these things. I think, oh, come on, Christopher. Better to start off where you're there and go this way. It's only going one way, the Royal Academy. So I joined. And it was a little bit elderly, a little bit over there. Anyway, I set out, not just me, but a group of my friends, recruiting. And we went, talked to Richard Deacon, we talked to Bill Woodrow, we talked to Tony Cragg, we talked to Anish Kapoor. We got every single artist, Anthony Gormley, they all started joining because the echo of Munnings was fading. So now, where are we? The younger artists don't even blink. They say, that's wonderful. Yes, please. We'd like to be part of this. So, something's transformed. I think this is good for this country. So now we have a Royal Academy that's what it was meant to be. We probably have 15 of some of the greatest architects in the world are our members. The same with the sculptors, the same with the painters. It is transformed. It is transformed. And the schools are better. Everything is better. I'm touching wood now, because what goes up comes down. But on the basis of that, and amazingly, about 5 years ago, when Nick Grimshaw stood down, he announced he was standing down as president at the annual dinner. So we weren't there with the cigars and the brandy, and there were lots of women, not quite enough, Francis, but we're trying. And he said, I'm going to step down. He'd done 7 years. And there was all the academicians started looking at each other. And a couple of weeks later, people started approaching me. And again, I talked to the family, as you would. I said, look, people are approaching me. Should I stand for this job? And Charlotte said, as before, oh God, over time, it's wonderful you could be able to paint, but it'll destroy your career. So I taught the children, and the children who were late teens, early 20s said, yes, Dad, you must, go on. So I did, and I was elected. And it's a bit like the Pope. We all sit in a room, it's like this. There are 80 people in the room, they vote and vote and vote until one comes out. So I did it. So now, what is the Royal Academy? How could it be useful for us in the future? Now let's just change what's been said just a touch. We've invested, like you have, immensely in the digital. This is the future. This is the way of reaching people. However, here's the conflict. The reason I'm moved by the Royal Academy is it's a very emotional place because it's personal. You and I know that the art world is stratified by age and by success. And as an artist, in this country, there's a Polar-mint effect. You're out of the blocks, your work's inexpensive, you're fashionable, you're trendy, you're sexy, off you go. Then there's a desperate middle years when you've got a family, everything's on your shoulders. And then if you're lucky, that peaks up at the end. But those different generations don't tend to mix. The young stay with the young, the middle-aged stay with the middle-aged, the elderly stay with the elderly. In the Royal Academy, we're all mixed. We have a member there, Leonard Manasseh. He's 100. He's the first academician in the history of the Academy to be 100. He was an architect of the Festival of Britain in 1951, which was the year I was born. It's extremely humane. The personal is important. I think the question for us somehow is how do we keep the personal while reaching out and being as accessible as we possibly can? So that's one of the things that I think is a strength of the Royal Academy. And so now moving just slightly to the young and teaching. The tradition in art, there's a phrase in Ezra Pound, you catch a light from a fine old eye. You know someone older. The tradition comes that way. It doesn't come out of a book. The tradition comes from seeing a painter, from hearing a great singer, from maybe working with a great administrator, a great politician. You catch the light. You catch the light from their eye, and it carries on. It's personal. But how can you make that have reality today, where we're rather overwhelmed by connectivity? I mean, I'm a painter, so I believe in touch, and I believe that has a sort of authenticity which I can't describe. But I don't half believe in it. And the young artists in the Academy, they are an elite. There's no getting around this. We have 700, 800 applications for 17 places. Those boys and girls are an elite, and we look after them. But in a way, it's our best hope of keeping the quality of art up. And I'm nervous about saying that, but I'm aware that with my own children, I want them to go into a situation where someone knows them. Not to be processed, but someone to know them. For God's sake, work for a good boss. Be within a group. How can we do it? So the question for us, how can we manage this? Now, amazing ambition, which we all have, to somehow embrace the world. This is a noble ambition. The question is how we do it. How we do it. So our galleries and museums get bigger and bigger, the reach gets bigger and bigger, but somehow in the way we do it, we need to communicate the personal. I mean, that's an enormous value of art. So just to move on to donors now, briefly, and then I'll finish. All three of us, despite talking about art, can I say this, Alex, can I say this? A lot of our job is fundraising. Because no matter how generous the government is, we need to top it up. And we need to think about that all the time. But the key to fundraising is the personal. Because why does a donor want to name a gallery or to fund an opera? They want to be remembered. Back to the personal. It's enormously emotional. What have I done in my life? Who will remember me? What great thing have I done? It's enormously personal. That's how we communicate with our donors. Because when they come to you, they're not rich people saying, oh, here's a tax break, let's give some to the Tate. Actually, that's a cheap way of thinking about it. They're thinking about legacy. And I think more and more we're going to have to do that. And frankly, it's a pleasure. I know it's very, very hard work, but it is a pleasure because it feeds that individual's passion and belief back into a system, which I think increasingly the government, frankly, will struggle to do. I think we're getting ready for this, aren't we? All of us in our own ways. I don't want to let the government off the hook because all of us believe in art very much, and the government must show that too. And my final point would be about the education of the young. And I'm going to repeat what you said in a way about EBAC. Slightly different slant. I was interviewed by the art newspaper about this. I'm not an educationalist. I can't do statistics. But I do know what it feels like. And when I was studying art, God, what was it, 15, 16, 17, I couldn't have coped with my A-levels or my GCEs without art. Because those young people, don't do it to them. Don't do it to them. Unless they can do art and sport and music, they'll crack up with maths and geography and history. Don't do it to them. And also, it's a wonderful complementary subject. It's a beautiful subject, art, to go with science. Most of the great engineers now, look at Anisha's chap, these are artists, actually. If I'd known engineering could be like that, I might have done a twitch at that age. It's really important. So anyway, look, to round up, because we should have the conversation, it's personal. We're going to do digital, but in the end it's personal. Anyway, thank you.
I would like to open it to the floor. There are two roving mics, so please wait until you have the mic. Can you please introduce yourself? Simply tell us who you are and what organization you may be with. I think it will be interesting to see the range in the room. So can I have some hands, please? Yes, sir. There's a gentleman on the front. So please tell us who you are and who you're with.
My name is this on? My name is John Gibbon. I'm a professor of mathematics at Imperial College. I do know something about science funding, little about arts funding, but to give a perspective, Congress in Washington voted $60 billion for 1 year for the science budget of the United States. In this country, it's £3 billion. And there's a huge network of lobbyists presenting the case, and government thinks it's going to get something back. Spin-off companies, prestige projects. So my question is, how do you present your case to government, particularly when ministers are always changing and you have to keep on and on and on making the case.
Thank you. That's a very good question, yes.
Well, shall I kick off?
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
There are many arguments for why one should support the arts, from art for art's sake, just the sort of arguments we're talking about, the personal, and creating the opportunity for others to get their sense of the world. But that is a tiny portion of the argument that cuts it with ministers. And the fact that we try and we make the case that international cultural exchanges, a fundamental aspect of the success of UK PLC, and the fact that the Royal Opera House can broker a skills exchange program with upwards of 40 institutions in China, to which the Premier's wife and the cultural minister will attend on day one, gives us a bit of purchase with the Chinese government that otherwise wouldn't be the case. And that actually we can do it in a much more sophisticated, subtle and bottom-up way than is possible from a more sort of de Regis Napoleonic approach from, say, our French colleagues. But on the one hand, on the other, mathematics is a good example, but the links between studying music and understanding the inherent beauty of a mathematical form, there are interesting links there, and Christopher's point that the arts are fundamental to a rounded education. Now, do those arguments land? We as a society invest a remarkably small proportion of our GDP on cultural funding, either through the tax system or through direct grants. We've just had a fortnight where France and Germany have both increased their cultural budgets by 5%, where Iceland has increased its cultural budget by 10%, where Finland has compulsory arts subjects all the way through time at school, and we haven't managed to land those arguments, but they're certainly not going to stop.
I would just add to that. I think we've been singularly unsuccessful in making a good case for the arts, and certainly, we have year on year diminishing support from the government. So we're not making a very strong case for the arts. We're not, at the very least, beyond the. Everybody knows it's good for you, but the use value of creativity, we're not demonstrating that. We're not making a connection between creativity, cultural life, and the economic health of the nation. I think what we are doing, and we can demonstrate the impact of cultural infrastructure on urban regeneration, and I think what has happened to the neighbourhood of Bankside and Southwark is a very, very clear demonstration, whether you like what's happened there or not. Certainly the development of Tate Modern has had a major impact. And of course, the three organisations on this platform today represent a very significant chunk of a really major tourist offer. And we do know that cultural attractions are almost top of the bill beyond the royal family of the things that foreign visitors, that single out London in particular and the UK in general as a place to visit. So, we're not really doing enough with the evidence that we have to present the case, which is very unfortunate.
Yes.
There's one particular argument, I think, which we haven't begun to think about, which is the role of arts and culture to help make what is the 100-year life. And that's that if you're 30 to 40, you might expect on average to live to the age of 100. Well, so what is that life going to be in terms of sort of cultural expression and exploration? And that actually a really vibrant art scene, I think, is a super important part of that, and it's taken as absolute. So I wrote that the health service, social care budget should increase as life expectancy does. But what about the aspects that make that life as rich as possible? the opportunity to explore oneself to the personal. No, I think that's a brilliant mantra.
I think it is that enriching, and I think you all mentioned it, which is that intangible, and at the same time, it's difficult to demonstrate as actually being part of the health of our nation. It's quite an interesting aspect, yes.
It's not so difficult. I mean, we know we can demonstrate that the number of days that people take off work due to ill health and depression,
Exactly.
it costs the nation a huge
Yes.
amount of money, and we do know that experiences of culture, music,
Yes.
visual arts, and sport or whatever do enhance people's well-being.
Exactly.
Not difficult maths.
That's right. Yes. Christopher, did you want to add anything?
Slightly embarrassed because we get 0 from the government, 0. But we don't have to play that hard. we use that one. I'm on the violin all the time. We don't like this, and it does play very well. But I mean that frankly, you need a completely balanced ecology of fundraising. The other point is, I mean, since I was a student, I didn't really expect necessarily to make my living as an artist. But in Southwark, for example, that Francis has mentioned, there are major exporters. Major exporters. Just take Anish Kapoor. Anish owns a street in Camberwell of about 7 or 8 warehouses. He's exporting all over the world, as is Anthony. A lot of our great and famous artists are enormously successful. And, sorry, just anecdotally, I mean, sales in New York are, you watch those very carefully because British artists will be selling well now. We've just had a 10% dip in sterling. This sort of thing affects it. The more serious point is, artists are classic entrepreneurs. I now, unbelievably, employ 3 people. I'm training them all up. I don't do much teaching, but I'm training them up. One of them has a studio in my studio, and most artists now, don't you think there's a difference between years ago? I mean, that whole landscape of individual artists working globally, and that's an optimistic thing. So it doesn't quite answer your question. But
thank you. We did try, actually, to invite the Minister for Culture, and unfortunately, it was very difficult. Yes. There are two there. The lady first, yes.
You're absolutely right.
Can you say who you are, please?
Yes, my name's Elizabeth Lloyd Davis. I've been in the music profession all my life. But I watched television avidly and thought, well, if I'm coming to this symposium this evening, I must know who the Culture Secretary is. And I may say that by 4:30, the very last appointment was the Culture Secretary. And it's, I'm sure, a charming young woman called Karen Bradley, who comes from the Home Office. And I don't think she knows anything about culture at all. So I wish you all very good luck in promoting the arts as a priority in this country.
Thank you.
Rodney Slapford. I was a professional double bass player most of my life, and I ran European String Teachers Association in this country, and also I ran the School of Strings at the Royal Northern College of Music for 18 years. The international element of the music profession in this country is amazing. What does disturb me is, first of all, the quality of teaching once you get outside the major cities, and the very little exposure that young people have in some of the rural areas. I now live in Norfolk, having retired some years ago. Children just do not get the opportunity there to have access to good music tuition. And when I come down to London and I'm on various music panels awarding scholarships and for competitions and so forth, so many of the young artists taking part are not of our own homegrown English quality. They come from all over the world, which is fine, and they play marvellously, much better than many of our own locally grown musicians. I lament that fact, because when I got into the National Youth Orchestra, there was a huge structure in this country of good local orchestras for young people, supported by quite good teaching, and that seems to have evaporated overnight. And it's wonderful that we have access to Alex's performances at Covent Garden in our local cinema in Fakenham, in the middle of Norfolk. That's wonderful. We go regularly, and I come down and I go to the Royal Academy. I pay my subscription, and I enjoy going whenever I can. But in Norfolk, there was a demonstration of a saxophone quartet. Came to, some years ago now, came to do a demonstration in local schools. And they got up at the end of it, held up a saxophone, and they said, "What's this instrument?" And the kid in the front row, after an hour's lecture demonstration, said, "Please, miss, it's a chicken." And that's where we are. I don't know what one can do about it.
Yes. I think that's actually a very relevant question, because what all three of you in your institutions have is excellence in education. But what happens outside London?
Well, and indeed in pockets within London. No, I mean, we had El Sistema a long time before it was conceived in Venezuela. No, I think it's a really serious issue.
Well, you do with the certainly when my children were younger at primary school in Lambeth, the Royal Ballet did this amazing scheme of Chance to Dance.
And look, individually as institutions, we do lots of things. Chance to Dance, in fact, this year is celebrating its 25th anniversary, and we rolled it out to Thurrock, and the first graduate from Thurrock has joined the Royal Ballet School, and it's completely and utterly wonderful. But there are limits to what we can do at scale, and so that hence things like the National Nutcracker, and there's a national dramatic singing project based around Carmen that we're going to develop next year. But the idea of financially affordable access to instruments, to music tuition, to having music embedded within the space for music within the curriculum. Art subjects encouraged, GCSEs and A-levels, to see that become increasingly part of the USP of private education. You can't open a brochure for a private school without it banging on about at great length, how any child entrusted in their care will receive a rich cultural education that will draw out their own personal qualities in and of itself, but also for the benefit of their mental refreshment in relation to the rest of the curriculum. And that is, some schools get it, but it's such a long way from being systemic or systematic, and it's a huge issue.
Yes, I think what big institutions, urban metropolitan institutions like the Tate and the Royal Opera House and arguably the Academy can do, is that they can create opportunities for young people, schools and their teachers to have experiences that might be transformative for the pupils. When we opened the new Tate Modern 4 weeks ago, our first public event was for 3,000 school children from the length and breadth of the UK who came before any other members of the public with their teachers, and in particular to encourage the teaching profession to work with us to create content in their schools. And I think that's one of the given that there is so little institutional support, it really is up to the individual commitments of teachers in the classroom who then personally make it take the responsibility. And it's terribly sad that those structures that you talk about, regional youth orchestras and bands and access to, every child having the violin or whatever are disappearing. And what we can do is try and support those schools and those teachers and those children who want to have access.
And I think we can also use our convening power to raise the level of debate and to raise awareness of the issue. I think that's absolutely something we can
even
do.
today at the Tate, we were talking about what role could we as an institution have in raising or in drawing attention to the absence of visual arts teaching in schools. And how can we become an advocate for that? How can we really represent the sector in a more active way?
But it's a little bit more than that. I thought that your question was also the quality of the teaching, as well as the availability of the teaching. And I think that's something that we may need to look at. Christopher, did you want to add anything?
No, I didn't.
Thank you. Yes.
I know you all discussed about...
Oh, can you tell us who you are, please?
Oh, sorry. I'm Lucy and I work for Martin Randall Travel. It's a cultural tour operator which do sort of music and art and architecture tours across the world. I just wondered, you all talked about sort of diversity and being very sort of open organisations to everyone and encouraging that. In terms of people that you employ, I know that a lot of people, I come from sort of an art history background and that's what I studied, but in terms of getting into that sort of sector and area is extremely difficult because you might be expected to work for free for different internships, and therefore if you don't actually live in London and are from London and are not from a background in which you have someone to support you and fund you, it's not something that's possible for you. So therefore, it's not effectively open to you. So in that way, like, how do you sort of address the issue of being open as an organisation in terms of people who visit you, but also for people who can join you and work for you as an organisation as well?
Thank you.
I could just respond briefly to that. I mean, I think we recognised about 4 years ago that our internship programme was not creating opportunities for diverse students. It was providing opportunities for privileged students who were able to self-support them through occasionally years of internships before landing the plum job. So we took a decision about 4 years ago to stop offering unpaid internships and to have, by open competition, a number of paid internships, and then to run all other internships through university and college BA and MA schemes as part of educational programs. So I think that has certainly improved the diversity of these students and graduates coming through the Tate as part of their professional development. But I think I recognise the problem. I think it's partly a symptom of the fact that there are a very, very large number now of art history and curatorial programmes which produce far in excess. The number of graduates is excessive compared to the very, very small number of professional jobs available in the sector. It's a very small sector. But I'm more worried about looking much, much earlier back into the schools and encouraging individuals from a very wide range of backgrounds that art might be an option for them. Either, the whole array of professional careers within the arts, from being a practitioner to a curator to being a technician, is simply something that is very under encouraged in our schools. So I think it has to start very early on.
Yes, absolutely. But what about the audiences? Wasn't that the other half of your question?
It was just more about promoting the idea that it is open to everybody, and I think that that's half the problem, is that if you feel that it's not open to you, then you switch off and you don't interact with it.
Yes, it's the new audiences. Yes, thank you.
No, just not so much internships. I think you covered it, and it was brilliant actually to be part of that move. But we will. Yesterday, I had the most wonderful day, which was celebrating the achievements of our annual intake of paid apprentices, who are recruited from across the country, and we have highly specialist skills. We have an armoury apprentice, for example, who as part of a 2-year course goes off and does work with Mulberry, and actually to see them graduate and to get the enthusiasm, their enthusiasm is just wonderful, and we will be welcoming our 50th paid apprentice this September. So I think whether it's paid internships, whether it's working structurally with relevant courses, or indeed craft apprentices, because the craft skills that underpin our work are so essential as well. Whether or not it ends up, those people end up working for the Royal Opera House or the National Theatre, or in one person's case, Chris O'Feely's studio, it's just vitally important.
Thank you.
The Royal Opera House have done something rather wonderful down in Thurrock, which is really quite a deprived area where, in fact, I think you've got apprenticeships down there. You've certainly got a lot of the warehousing is done down there. Which, I mean, the problem for us is we're relatively small. Although our staff is about 300, there are relatively few opportunities. I mean, we equally changed it. So now anybody that comes in is paid. There's no such thing as an unpaid internship. But just to push it a little bit to a different direction, I didn't talk about our plans very much, but one thing we're very keen on is getting a wider audience, particularly younger people. Our demographic, I'm afraid, can I say this? It's a bit like this room. And me, you see. And so I think we genuinely need new audiences. We face Mayfair, which already sounds exclusive, but there's also a shop. If you come out of Burlington Gardens and you turn right and go along a bit, there's a funny perfumey scent in the air. Do you know what I'm going to say now? There's a shop just along to the right, and standing inside this shop are two men naked to the waist, right? And people spraying perfume in the air up and down the street. There's a huge queue of all the demographic we're dying to get. Now, I'm not going to suggest I strip naked to the waist and stand outside the front, because it really wouldn't work. But the more serious thing is, I think on that side of the Royal Academy, we've got much better chance of getting a new audience. And actually, just to go into to be more specific, our architecture program does attract a much younger group of people who come in. They're sort of trendy late 20s. They're like you. And they're all coming into the Royal Academy. So it's got a sort of north and south aspect. The courtyard, oh God, can we come in? But I am in two minds about this. And I remember talking to Nick Sirota years ago. This is about access. There is such a thing as flat access. No barriers. You're in the shop before you know you're there. You're in the museum before you realise. There's also steps with a portico. Now, when my mother, we lived in Portsmouth, when my mother went up to town, she wanted the steps and the portico. She wanted the gold leaf. She wanted the Dick Whittington feel that somewhere there is Buckingham Palace. So we have to do this too. Because if you make it completely flat access, you hardly realise you're in the museum. You're not getting you know what, someone really cares about art. And that's actually what the portico was for. It was to protect this precious thing. So we've got it's a quite difficult one to play. Look, we've all got porticos. But they've got a ramp. They've got a fantastic ramp. So they've got the best of both worlds. Anyway, but it's a serious issue.
It is.
Yeah.
We are already slightly over time, but we did start 5 minutes late. If I can ask for your indulgence, I will take just one more question before we finish. There was a lady at the front.
My name's Caroline Ogilvie. I'm another professor, I'm afraid, sitting next to this professor of mathematics. I'm a professor of genetics at King's College, and I work on the Guy's campus, which is just down the road from Tate Modern. And I would say that the vast majority of people that I work with have never set foot inside it. So it's wonderful that you have all these people coming, but it is a tiny fraction of the people who could be coming if they had their eyes open to the visual arts at an earlier time of their life. And this comes right back to the point about schools and demographic. Now, my old school actually has an artist in residence every year. And that sort of scheme, not just in schools, but also in workplaces, opens people's eyes to art in a much more direct way. And in fact, we had quite a lot of money given to build a new unit at Guy's from a big funding body, but one of the conditions was that there had to be an artist in residence, funding for art in the form of artist in residence, you know, for the first year of this when this building was finished. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And she did some wonderful work, and lots of people who'd never thought about art before were inspired by it. But it still needs to go further, and more people need to be doing this, and more people need to be exposed to art, because a lot of people are frightened of it, and they think, I don't understand it. Oh, this art business, no, I'd rather go to the movies or something.
I mean, I think it's a really good point. One of the things that I like to do when I'm talking with people who also work in the art world, or even when you're interviewing people, is ask, what was it that brought you to art? What was the experience that you talked about? There is, most people who work in the cultural sector have had at some point in their youth, some kind of profound experience. It might be a moment of a few seconds, or it might have been a longer period where something changed for them, that the light shone. It can be an encounter with an artist, it can be a visit to a museum and seeing a painting for the first time, it can be the experience of music. And I think it's incredibly important that all young people, all children have a range of those experiences, so that for some of them there will be that moment of transformation. Exactly. And to not enable that to happen is depriving people of something that's absolutely essential in their lives.
Thank you. And I think at that wonderful moment, this moment of transformation, I think can bring us to the end of today's discussion, which I think we could have carried on for several more hours. And it also feels as if though there's so much more to do. And perhaps we also, as part of ROSL, can lend a hand in this, despite the fact, as you all know, that we do support a lot of musicians worldwide. I would like to thank our three speakers very much indeed. You've given us, I think, some insights that will open up, I think, our eyes a little bit further than perhaps we had when we arrived. Thank you so much.